14 days before a $2.3 billion biotech merger, a CEO accused his own wife of corporate espionage. The proof looked flawless: her login credentials, her timestamps, her internal memos.
Change
Within
investigation
hours,
to
she was
review.
divorced,
Press
bound by an
release scheduled
NDA,
for
and
48
pushed off the
hours.
board she helped build. But there was one problem. The surveillance on her account had started 6 weeks before the leak ever happened.
Surveillance started six
So
weeks
the
before the
scandal
leak.
wasn't discovered. It was built. And when federal
We can't
regulators
hide from
froze the
this.
merger,
The light
voice
leaves
memos
nothing in
buried
shadow.
inside the executive archive revealed something far worse than a broken marriage. They revealed premeditated corporate fraud. The Chicago skyline glowed beyond the glass walls of Lawson Biotech's executive tower, all gold and steel as dusk settled in. Inside the corner office, it felt colder than the air outside. Olivia Grant stood by the window, posture steady, eyes tired in a way she refused to advertise. She'd helped build Lawson from scratch, late nights drafting investor decks, early mornings running projections, believing in the mission, the science, and Derek. Now she was standing in the office that used to feel like theirs, and she could tell something permanent was about to happen. Derek Lawson sat behind his polished desk, tailored suit immaculate, voice calm in the way that never allowed room for argument. He didn't invite her to talk. He called her in to receive a verdict. A thin folder sat between them like an exhibit in court. "Olivia," he said, measured. "The board received something this morning. I need you to see it before they escalate." She crossed the room without hesitating. Inside were printed emails, internal memos, confidential trial summaries, each stamped with her login credentials. Fresh timestamps. Sensitive attachments. Catastrophic implications. Derek explained it like he was reading a report. Proprietary Phase 3 data had been leaked to a competitor, and the digital trail led back to her. He didn't need to say the words, "I think it was you." The folder did that for him. Olivia read everything twice. The writing sounded like her, almost. But the cadence was wrong in places. Too polished. Too formal. Like an imitation done by someone who'd studied her closely. She looked up, expecting reassurance. What she found instead was calculation. "This isn't real," she said evenly. "I didn't send these." Derek let out a slow breath, the kind people use when they want to look burdened by responsibility. "I want to believe you," he said. "But the board won't. And if federal regulators get involved, this stops being an internal issue." He didn't have to finish the threat. Regulators was enough. He came around the desk and lowered his voice, like he was offering mercy. "There's a way to contain this. If we separate you from the company immediately, it shows leadership. It protects the merger. It protects shareholders. It protects you." Then he slid another document toward her. Divorce papers, already prepared. A resignation agreement. An NDA that didn't end. The efficiency of it was suffocating. This wasn't a conversation. It was a plan. The first crack in Olivia's composure wasn't fear. It was the betrayal baked into the solution. Derek wasn't fighting the accusation. He was managing optics. He talked about investor confidence, market response, timing. He never once said, "I know you didn't do this." That silence hit harder than the allegation. "You're asking me to take the fall," she said quietly. Derek's expression tightened by a fraction. "I'm asking you to make a sacrifice for what we built." Out in the corridor, Monica Reeves hovered with a tablet in hand, pretending not to look inside the office. As chief PR officer, she understood something most people didn't: you don't win by being right. You win by shaping what people believe first. Hours earlier, she'd already finalized the crisis response draft. Somewhere else in the building, a contracted IT consultant had quietly locked down the metadata trail she'd directed weeks ago. Every breadcrumb led to Olivia. Every timestamp lined up like a rehearsed alibi. Back inside, the pressure didn't need shouting. Derek painted the future in calm detail: a formal investigation, headlines, federal scrutiny, the Titan-Gen merger collapsing, Olivia's name attached forever to corporate sabotage. Then he offered the alternative: quiet divorce, clean exit, financial security, silence. Olivia stared out at the skyline again and understood the real shift. The company no longer belonged to the people who built it. It belonged to perception, to shareholders, to strategy. And this was too organized to be sudden. The documents were ready before today. Legal had been briefed. The narrative had been drafted. She wasn't being removed because she was risky. She was being removed because she was inconvenient. Derek set a pen beside the signature line. If you sign tonight, we control the story. Control landed differently now. Olivia signed, not because she accepted guilt, and not because she believed him, but because she needed time. Time to figure out who engineered this and why. Derek gathered the papers with no emotion, like he'd just closed a deal instead of ending a marriage. In the hallway, Olivia headed for the elevator. Near the corner, Monica's voice slipped through a half-closed conference room door. Once she's gone, the merger is clean, Monica said into her phone, steady, certain, final. Olivia slowed, breath catching, not in shock, but in clarity. This wasn't damage control. It was orchestration. The elevator doors closed. As they descended, Olivia realized the divorce she signed wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of a war she never chose. The next morning, Chicago felt too quiet, like the city itself was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The news hadn't hit yet. The stock hadn't moved. But the silence felt staged, not accidental. Olivia sat in her downtown apartment surrounded by neatly stacked legal papers, replaying Derek's words. It wasn't the accusation that haunted her. It was the precision. He'd sounded like someone following a script, not reacting to chaos. By noon, her access to Lawson's systems was gone. Her internal email archive had vanished, replaced by an automated compliance notice. Her credentials were under review. That phrasing alone made her stomach tighten. Under review implied process. But the divorce agreement had already erased her from the board. The consequences had come first. The investigation was just window dressing. Then an anonymous email arrived, encrypted, through a service she hadn't touched in years. Subject: your right to question it. Body: check the metadata trail on the internal memo dated March 14th. A screenshot of server activity logs was attached. Olivia stared at it, pulse steady but alert. The format was unmistakable: Lawson's compliance export template. Only a handful of people had access to that. 2 hours later, her phone rang from a blocked number. "My name is Caleb Morris," the voice said. "I used to be Lawson's compliance director. I resigned last month." He didn't sound frantic. He sounded certain. "You were set up," he said. "And whoever did it understood audit procedures better than most of the people who work there." Caleb explained the anomaly that had made him start digging. An internal memo supposedly authored by Olivia showed it was created on her device at 11:42 p.m., but backup logs recorded the file being generated at 2:17 a.m. through a remote administrative account. The timestamps had been altered after upload. That kind of edit didn't happen quietly unless you had senior-level authority. And then there was the access trail, her credentials logging in from a VPN node inside the company's own building, not her home network, not her usual travel pattern. Olivia felt the picture click into place. "Why didn't you report it?" she asked. Caleb exhaled. "Because the review got redirected before I could escalate. I was told to close it." "By who?" A pause. Then, carefully, Monica Reeves signed off on the override. Derek approved the compliance restructuring 2 days later. Weeks before the scandal broke, Monica had personally authorized executive-level surveillance on Olivia's account, officially as risk mitigation during merger talks, practically as total access to Olivia's life inside the company. Every draft. Every login. Every timestamp. The leak story hadn't triggered surveillance. Surveillance came first. Meanwhile, in the Glass headquarters downtown, Monica moved through meetings like nothing had shifted. She drafted talking points, reassured board members, calibrated the narrative. She believed Olivia was cornered, divorced, gagged, discredited. Derek believed the same thing. He assumed she'd retreat rather than risk humiliation. He didn't understand Olivia's patience. Caleb offered one more detail that landed like a nail. The alleged leak hit exactly 14 days before the $2.3 billion merger vote with Titan Gen, just in time to remove Olivia's board vote and frame Derek as decisive. It was classic crisis choreography: identify risk, isolate it, announce corrective action, restore confidence. Only the risk had been manufactured. Olivia started mapping the sequence on paper: surveillance authorization, metadata edits, credential manipulation, board briefing, divorce, silence. Each step fit too cleanly. This wasn't defensive, Caleb said before he hung up. It was premeditated. I kept copies. After the call, Olivia looked out at the skyline again. But she wasn't staring into loss anymore. She was studying structure. Another encrypted message came through. Surveillance on your account was authorized 6 weeks before the leak. Monica initiated it personally. Olivia's expression hardened into something calmer than anger. The scandal hadn't just been designed. It had been rehearsed. The first article hit 48 hours after the divorce. Not a direct accusation, nothing that could be sued cleanly, but the implication was unmistakable. Internal turbulence at Lawson Biotech amid leadership transition. Anonymous executives. Carefully chosen phrases. Words like instability, volatility, breach of trust. Enough to stain. Not enough to prove. Within hours, 2 more outlets echoed the same language, almost line for line. Olivia read them in silence and felt the truth confirm itself. This wasn't journalism chasing a story. This was a story being fed, measured, controlled, timed. Monica Reeves had opened her Rolodex. At headquarters, Derek gave a short statement under the company logo. Calm. Somber. Professional. Leadership transitions are never easy, he said. But Lawson Biotech remains focused on innovation and integrity. When asked whether his divorce connected to the data concerns, he paused just long enough to perform discomfort. My personal life will not distract from our commitment to shareholders. He didn't defend her. He distanced himself. And in doing that, he made her absence feel justified. Monica watched from behind the cameras, satisfied. She didn't need to scream Olivia is guilty. She only needed the public to think she must have done something. Olivia felt the pressure in the way power pressures people, not with confrontation, but with erosion. Invitations quietly disappeared. Boards asked for clarification. Friends wrote careful messages that sounded supportive until you heard the doubt in the punctuation. Fear didn't show up as panic. It showed up as isolation. So Olivia didn't go public. She didn't rant, didn't plead, didn't post. Instead, she walked into the office of Lillian Brooks, a federal corporate litigation attorney known for tearing executive fraud cases apart. Olivia laid out the timeline. Surveillance. Metadata manipulation. Compliance override. Orchestrated divorce. Lillian listened without interrupting. When Olivia finished, Lillian leaned back and said, flatly, "If even half of this is verifiable, it's not just defamation. It's fraud. And it's obstruction." She explained the reality: metadata could be altered, but artifacts remained: server logs, backups, encryption layers, admin trails. The key was getting lawful access before anything could be purged. "You're not dealing with amateurs," Lillian said. "You're dealing with someone who understands compliance loopholes and narrative sequencing." For the first time since the divorce, Olivia felt fear give way to something steadier. Strategy. She started documenting everything: publication timing, phrasing patterns, which outlets moved first. She transferred Caleb's evidence to Lillian through encrypted channels. Victimhood had been forced on her. But planning belonged to her. Monica kept pressing, just enough to keep Olivia tainted until the merger vote. Another columnist ran a piece about founder sentimentality clouding governance, subtly framing Derek's divorce as necessary reform. But then Lillian called with something that shifted the ground. "We're reconstructing the digital trail," she said. "Most of the surface logs match what you were shown, but there's an encrypted executive communications archive nested behind admin credentials. It's not standard retention." Olivia's mind snapped to the implications immediately. If someone had hidden conversations outside formal audit visibility, they'd done it for a reason. And if that archive contained directives, surveillance authorization, timing, optics, then Monica's narrative wasn't just cruel. It was provable. Olivia ended the call and looked out at the skyline again. Not cornered. Not pleading. She saw a grid of power structures, just waiting to shift. As Olivia and Lillian dug deeper into Lawson's internal systems, one truth kept sharpening: the divorce wasn't a personal implosion. It was structural. Everything pointed toward one goal: close the Titan-Gen merger at any cost. The scandal didn't distract from that goal. It cleared the board for it. Forensics began flagging irregularities in the merger valuation. Lawson's growth projections weren't wildly inflated, they were calibrated. Just enough to justify Titan-Gen's $2.3 billion figure without triggering immediate alarm. Olivia saw edits made after her access was revoked. Not sloppy, not reckless, carefully tuned. Then they found something uglier: IP licensing rights for a promising oncology compound had been quietly rerouted through a new subsidiary created only weeks earlier. No public executives. No obvious names. But the authorization trail tied back to Derek's executive credentials. If the merger closed under those terms, royalty control wouldn't sit where it was supposed to. The money would flow somewhere else, somewhere off the main map. And Olivia's removal from the board eliminated the one person most likely to ask the obvious question: why does this look like a shell? Lillian laid the timeline out across the conference table like a crime scene. Surveillance on Olivia authorized, 6 weeks before the leak. Compliance restructuring, 4 weeks before the leak. IP rerouting, 3 weeks before the leak. Divorce papers drafted, at least 1 week before the confrontation. Board acceleration vote, scheduled 14 days after her resignation. This wasn't reaction, Lillian said. This was preemptive containment. Inside the company, Derek pushed urgency under the banner of opportunity: market volatility, regulatory windows, shareholder confidence. Board members felt uneasy, but Monica's briefs framed the speed as bold leadership. Her presence in executive sessions no longer looked like PR support. It looked like architecture. And yet, for all their planning, the scheme had one flaw: digital permanence. The encrypted archive Lillian's team found was layered behind admin permissions, too hidden to be casual, too structured to be accidental. As forensic specialists worked through lawful access channels, they uncovered an external server masquerading as a consulting platform. Metadata pointing to a private node registered under a Delaware LLC created the same week Olivia's surveillance started. Lillian prepared a sealed federal briefing: securities fraud indicators, compliance obstruction, evidence manipulation. Then she looked at Olivia and said something that landed with weight. "You need to decide what you want. Clearing your name and exposing systemic fraud aren't always the same outcome." Olivia didn't answer right away. She understood what escalation would do: investor panic, regulatory collapse, criminal exposure. But silence would cement her as the villain in someone else's story. That night, a forensic analyst sent a confirmation that tightened everything into one line: the private server's executive clearance profile matched Monica Reeves. Olivia read it twice. She wasn't divorced because she was guilty. She was divorced because she was inconvenient. And the archive meant to bury the orchestration was now pointing straight at its architect. The sealed complaint went out before dawn: no press, no hints, no theatrics. Lillian submitted it through secure federal channels with forensic reconstructions attached, timestamp discrepancies, authorization logs, server linkages. No dramatic language. Just careful, devastating precision. By mid-morning, the first tremor hit. The SEC issued a temporary inquiry notice about pre-merger disclosures. Hours later, DOJ followed with a preservation directive. Lawson was ordered to retain all records and communications pending review. The merger vote, less than 2 weeks away, was paused under regulatory examination. No one said fraud in public. But everyone heard it anyway. Lawson's stock dropped 12% before noon. Analysts called it uncertainty around executive transparency. Investors demanded answers. Media outlets pivoted from insinuations about Olivia to scrutiny of governance. The story changed in a single day: not disgraced former executive, but what's happening at the top of Lawson. In the boardroom, Derek cracked for the first time. He read the notice twice and set it down hard. She's bluffing, he snapped, though no one had even said Olivia's name. But bluffing didn't trigger preservation directives. Bluffing didn't freeze mergers. Monica stayed calm on the surface, advising cooperation statements, emphasizing compliance strength. Underneath, she began shifting her language. In meetings, decisions became executive-level determinations, not shared strategy. In emails, she documented recommendations with careful distance. She understood risk better than anyone in that building, and she could feel the exposure widening. Olivia watched the fallout without satisfaction. This wasn't revenge. It was leverage. Lillian was blunt: this shifts power. It doesn't guarantee victory. 2 days later, Derek requested a private meeting through intermediaries. Olivia agreed, on neutral ground, in Lillian's building. He came in controlled but strained. The market pressure showed in the tightness around his eyes. "This doesn't have to escalate," he said, skipping pleasantries. He offered a new settlement, more money, restored equity shares, a public clarification acknowledging the investigation was inconclusive. It was reconciliation dressed up as containment. "If this spirals," he said evenly, "everyone loses." Olivia listened. Then answered in a calm that rattled him more than anger ever could. "Truth doesn't negotiate." Derek tried to pivot, hinting Monica's team had handled technical matters independently. Not outright blame. Just distance. The same man who demanded loyalty was now stepping sideways from decisions he approved. As he left, headlines shifted again, this time toward whistleblower framing. Olivia declined interview requests. Her silence stopped being read as guilt and started being read as discipline. That night, Lillian received formal correspondence. Federal authorities requested Olivia's voluntary cooperation for sworn testimony. Not a subpoena, but close enough to feel the gravity. Olivia read the letter slowly. Under oath meant she wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was becoming a central witness. The war had shifted phases. She looked out at the skyline again. The merger was frozen. The narrative was fractured. And now the government wanted her testimony. The subpoenas landed with surgical precision: communications, transcripts, compliance reviews, merger acceleration correspondence. Lawson's legal department shifted overnight from containment to survival. Derek convened an emergency meeting, insisting this was routine regulatory diligence. But his tone was sharper than usual, his patience thinner. The story no longer belonged to him. It belonged to investigators. Forensic Review uncovered coordinated messaging drafts created before Olivia's alleged leak even surfaced. Monica had circulated internal language about founder instability and proactive restructuring days ahead of the compliance report that supposedly triggered the crisis. That sequencing wasn't a mistake. It was a tell. Then came the deeper confirmation. Audit trails showed timestamp fields tied to Olivia's account had been adjusted under administrative privileges activated through Monica's executive clearance profile. Subtle edits, consistent fingerprints. Not glitches. Not accidents. Board unity began dissolving. A director resigned for health reasons. Another took leave pending clarity. Private emails reflected unease. Had leadership withheld material information during valuation approvals? Derek started preparing his exits, carefully framed language about delegated responsibilities, reliance on departmental expertise. Not direct accusation, but a legal posture forming in real time. Monica noticed immediately. She began meeting with independent counsel, building insulation before anyone could decide she was the easiest person to hand over. The executive floor went quiet in a new way, fewer emails, shorter threads, more hallway conversations. People stopped leaving trails. Then investigators found the thing that changed the temperature entirely, a concealed voice memo repository synced from executive mobile devices, classified under discretionary executive communications, invisible to normal compliance reviews. File titles referenced valuation alignment, optics timing, containment sequencing. Written messages could be explained away. Voice memos carried intent. But the archive required dual biometric authorization, 2 executive profiles linked to the encryption key. The registered identities, Derek Lawson and Monica Reeves. Neither could unlock it alone. When word of the archive reached the executive team, no one argued. Derek understood what voices could do to plausible deniability. Monica understood something just as dangerous. If Derek cooperated first, he could control context before she ever spoke. Across the city, Olivia heard the update from Lillian. The truth wasn't just somewhere inside Lawson's systems. It was trapped behind 2 fingerprints, and someone was going to blink first. The federal court order landed with clean, final force, removing the last wall between Lawson Biotech and the voice memo archive it had buried on purpose. A judge authorized compelled biometric access under investigative supervision, requiring both Derek Lawson and Monica Reeves to unlock the encrypted repository in front of federal agents. That ruling flipped the entire power dynamic. What had once been an executive safeguard became a weapon of exposure. Neither Derek nor Monica could refuse without making themselves look guilty, and both understood the same thing. Compliance meant playing recordings that were never meant to leave the building. The unlocking happened inside a secured conference room at Lawson Biotech headquarters. Federal investigators stood by as biometric scanners verified fingerprints and retinal signatures. The system didn't hesitate. It activated with cold efficiency, projecting directory after directory onto a locked forensic interface. Dozens of recordings appeared, each one time-stamped across the weeks leading up to Olivia Grant's forced resignation. The room didn't feel chaotic. It felt inevitable. Like gravity finally doing what it always does, the first memo played through external speakers under official documentation protocol. Monica's voice came through crisp and controlled, calm, analytical, unmistakable. She spoke about narrative stabilization and isolating internal risk variables prior to valuation confirmation. Derek answered in the same measured tone, agreeing that removing emotional liabilities strengthens board alignment. They weren't confessing in the dramatic sense. They didn't need to. The words were careful, but the meaning wasn't. The fabricated data leak came up as a controlled event, described as necessary to expedite structural adjustments. The implication wasn't subtle. This wasn't something they discovered. It was something they built. Another recording laid out the media strategy with unnerving clarity. Monica listed specific journalists who were receptive to executive stability framing, and she recommended releasing curated background details to steer how the public interpreted the story. Derek signed off on the sequencing, stressing that the divorce needed to look voluntary and dignified, clean enough to avoid triggering regulatory curiosity, each memo stacked intent on top of timing, like someone assembling a mechanism. The divorce wasn't collateral damage. It was insulation. Strategic, deliberate, planned.as transcripts were compiled in real time. Derek's posture shifted almost instantly. Behind closed doors with counsel, he began framing his role differently, less architect, more dependent. He claimed he had relied on Monica's expertise in crisis management and compliance oversight. He suggested her language had crossed technical lines he didn't fully understand. It wasn't an outright accusation. It was something colder, a controlled retreat. Monica, reviewing the same transcripts with her own counsel, caught the pivot immediately. She'd spent weeks engineering a narrative that boxed Olivia in. Now she was watching Derek quietly redraw the story in a way that left her holding the sharpest edge. Whatever alliance had existed between them didn't survive contact with federal light. Then investigators found something even stronger: artifacts embedded in the voice memo metadata, unique encryption signatures linked to Monica's private server infrastructure. Those fingerprints matched earlier forensic findings tying her administrative credentials to altered login logs. The same methods she used to fabricate Olivia's involvement now showed up as structured evidence against her. The irony wasn't poetic. It was procedural. Her deception had preserved its own blueprint. Federal prosecutors didn't wait. Arrest warrants for corporate fraud, obstruction of justice, and securities misrepresentation were issued under sealed authority and then executed publicly to prevent flight risk. News crews were already gathering outside Lawson Biotech when federal agents escorted Derek Lawson out of the building in controlled custody. He stayed composed and offered no statement, but the image itself shattered months of careful perception management. The decisive CEO no longer looked like the man steering the crisis. He looked like the subject of it. Monica exited separately hours later, met by cameras and a wall of questions that cut straight through the polish. Did you fabricate evidence? Was the divorce staged? Did you manipulate the merger valuation? She gave one line, tight and practiced: we acted in the company's best interest. Once, that phrase could steady investors. Now it sounded hollow next to recorded strategy. Across the city, Olivia watched the coverage in stillness. No victory lap. No celebration. Just the quiet recognition that patience had outlasted manipulation. The same tools Monica used to isolate her, surveillance, metadata control, narrative scripting, had preserved enough structure to expose the orchestration once someone finally looked closely enough. Vindication didn't arrive as a feeling. It arrived as confirmation, but even with charges filed, Lillian warned Olivia the story still wasn't finished. Cooperation agreements could reshape outcomes. Prosecutors often pushed defendants against each other, and if either Derek or Monica chased leniency, testimony could redraw liability in ways that weren't predictable. The case was entering its most psychologically dangerous phase. Days later, federal custody arrangements moved into preliminary hearing schedules. Late one afternoon, Lillian received an unexpected message from the detention facility holding Monica Reeves. It was brief, deliberate, and urgent. Monica requested a private meeting with Olivia Grant before formal indictment proceedings. No explanation. No conditions. Just the request. When Lillian relayed it, Olivia didn't respond right away. The person who orchestrated her humiliation, who tried to erase her, was now asking for access from confinement. It could be negotiation. It could be leverage. It could be something else entirely. Accepting risked emotional entanglement. Refusing risked missing critical information. As evening settled over Chicago again, Olivia sat with the irony. Monica once perfected controlled isolation, betting Olivia would be powerless without the institution behind her. Now Monica was the one reaching outward, trying to connect with the very person she tried to remove. The trap had closed. The only question left was whether this meeting would bring final clarity, or reveal one last calculated move. For months later, Chicago's skyline looked the same, but the power beneath it had shifted permanently. Lawson Biotech was no longer a symbol of innovation. It had become a cautionary tale. The Titan-Gen merger had collapsed under federal scrutiny, its valuation exposed as manufactured. Derek Lawson awaited sentencing after a negotiated plea tied to securities misrepresentation and obstruction. Monica Reeves sat in federal custody, her reputation dismantled not by rumor but by documentation. The system she manipulated had corrected against her. Olivia, meanwhile, stood in a renovated office overlooking the Chicago River, reviewing branding proposals for her new corporate ethics advisory firm, Veritas Strategic Oversight. The name wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. Clients came to her not because she was a victim, but because she'd shown something rare in executive culture, restraint paired with receipts. Public perception had flipped. The outlets that once whispered about her instability now framed her as the person who prevented a larger market distortion. The silence that once looked like weakness now read like discipline. Derek's hearing drew national coverage. He spoke in careful language, errors in judgment, avoiding direct condemnation of Monica. The judge emphasized fiduciary breach and deliberate obstruction. His influence, once built on controlled perception, had dissolved the moment that perception fractured. Monica's fall was lonelier. Allies vanished. Colleagues refused to mention her. In detention, she studied transcripts of her own voice memos like a strategist reviewing a failed campaign. Any regret she carried wasn't sentimental. It was analytical. She'd misjudged risk tolerance. She'd misjudged Olivia's patience. When Monica requested visitation again, Olivia agreed, under controlled conditions. A sterile federal visitation room. No theatrics. No shouting. Just two people facing the consequences of a game that was already over. "I underestimated you," Monica said at last, tone measured, not pleading. "I thought removing you stabilized the merger. I didn't account for how methodical you'd be." She admitted authorizing surveillance and coordinating narrative pressure, describing it like executive pragmatism rather than malice. "I thought perception was permanent once you controlled it," she added. Olivia listened without reacting. The courts had already handled consequence. "Control built on deception always collapses," Olivia replied, not as moral judgment, but as operational truth. Monica nodded once, absorbing what couldn't be negotiated anymore. As the meeting ended, Monica stayed seated a moment longer, as if adjusting to the fact that the structures she once weaponized now defined her boundaries. She hadn't been undone by chaos. She'd been undone by structure. Weeks later, Lillian called with a new development. Federal prosecutors in a separate biotech investigation wanted Olivia's consultation. They believed her experience could help map broader governance patterns, how companies build quiet systems to hide obvious wrongdoing. Olivia sat with the irony for a moment. She'd never planned to become part of regulatory reform. But the same discipline that saved her reputation had positioned her somewhere else entirely, inside the machinery that forces accountability. Derek fell because his power relied on perception. Monica fell because her strategy relied on manipulation. Olivia rose because she relied on evidence. Standing before the skyline again, she understood the ending wasn't revenge. It was recalibration. And if this story hits a little too close to reality, you already know why it matters. Because when narrative gets weaponized, the people who control the story don't always control the truth. So here's the question that lingers: if you discovered the system protecting you was built on deception, would you walk away to protect your peace, or risk everything to expose it?